Subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon so that you never miss any video lesson from RAU'S IAS Study Circle. Hello and welcome to Daily News Simplified, an answer to what, why and how of newspaper reading. Today we shall discuss the important news which has appeared in the New Delhi edition of the Hindu newspaper. Dated 28 June 2020, the news to be discussed has been displayed on your screen and time stamping for the same has been provided in your discussion box below. So with this, let's start our today's discussion from your prelims as well as mains perspective. Our first news of discussion appears on page number 1. It says Colombo plea for postponing debt repayment hangs fire. No decision for 4 months despite a request to Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Now this news highlights that the Sri Lankan government has asked the government of India to hold loan repayment worth $960 million. And in this regard, the Sri Lankan government has even requested the government of India for a currency swap facility. Now, as of now, because of the COVID-19, Sri Lankan economy is going under a huge stress. Now, apart from the COVID-19 situation, the Sri Lankan economy is also stressed because of heavy debt obligations from China. Now, this is another important angle which makes this news important for us from UPSC perspective, especially with respect to Sri Lanka getting debt trapped with China. So here you must understand that China has already provided Sri Lanka an urgent loan of $500 million to fight COVID-19. So this loan is also subject to repayment. Further, the Sri Lankan cabinet, despite their stressed economy, has approved to borrow another $80 million from China Development Bank for their road construction. Now I am mentioning these points to highlight the fact that Sri Lankan economy is already under severe stress, especially with respect to its debt obligation from China. And it is in this regard that the Sri Lankan government has asked the Indian government to hold their loan repayment worth $960 million. Now in this regard, it's important to note that Sri Lanka for this particular year is scheduled to repay loan worth $2.9 billion of its total external debt. So all these in a combined way is putting additional stress on the Sri Lankan economy. Now here there are certain implications for India if India does not hold loan repayment, and this makes Sri Lanka goes back to China again. So in this regard, the concerns for India is that Sri Lanka is already under severe Chinese debt trap, especially with respect to Hambantota port. Now as you can see that Hambantota port is in the southern point of Sri Lanka. So this makes Hambantota port a very important strategic location. And in this regard, Sri Lanka has already leased Hambantota port to China Merchant Port Holdings Limited for 99 years. And this was done because Sri Lanka was forced to hand over their assets having national and strategic importance because of the Chinese debt trap. Now simply Chinese debt trap refers to a loan given by China to a particular country, and that particular country is not able to repay back the loan. So it is in this regard that Sri Lanka is already under Chinese debt, especially with respect to Hambantota port. Now the concerns here is that Sri Lanka may again go back to China for more loans. Now this will have certain repercussions on India. First is that India may lose another neighbor to China, and second is that China will use this aspect against India, especially against the backdrop of India-China standoff in the Galwan Valley. So this particular news should not be seen in isolation, but with respect to Chinese debt trap. Now this news has highlighted that Sri Lankan government has requested for a currency swap facility. Now let us understand the meaning of currency swap agreement between two countries. Now currency swap facility generally refers to exchange of currencies between two countries. An amount to be borrowed is fixed. For example, let's say Sri Lanka can borrow up to $5 million from India, and the same for India applies as well. Now what happens here is that these countries will have to pay interest on the amount borrowed, and this payment of interest will be done as a fixed exchange rate. Now this is an important aspect of currency swap facility, that the repayment is done at an exchange rate which is fixed at the time of borrowing. So suppose if India and Sri Lanka agrees to repay interest at an agreed exchange rate of $1 is equal to 72 rupees, then they will continue their repayment of interest at this particular fixed exchange rate despite fluctuations in the exchange rate. So despite fluctuations in the exchange rate of dollars, the repayment will be done at the exchange rate which has been fixed at the time of borrowing between two countries under the currency swap agreement. So it is in this regard that Sri Lankan government has requested for a currency swap facility with the Indian government. So as already mentioned, this news should be viewed from the prism of Chinese debt trap. Now in this regard, let us go through a practice questions for your mains examination. The question says that explain China's debt trap policy and its implications for India on its neighborhood relations. And this question carries 15 marks and needs to be answered in 250 words. Now here please understand the term neighborhood relations. And neighborhood relation is not only confined to Sri Lanka but also extends to Nepal, Bhutan, Bangladesh as well as Pakistan. So all these aspects must be understood, especially with respect to China's debt trap policy and also China's Belt and Road Initiative. So this topic becomes important both from your prelims as well as from your mains perspective. In your prelims, it gets covered under current events of international importance, and in your mains, it gets covered under GS paper 2, specifically with respect to India and its neighborhood relations. Now this topic of currency swap agreement has also been covered in the June 2020 edition of the Focus magazine under the title Dollar Swap Line. Now it says that recently there has been a large scale outflow of FPIs from India leading to shortage of dollars and consequently record fall in value of rupee. That is depreciation of Indian rupee. So in order to address the current volatility in the exchange rate and to make available dollars in domestic market, the government of India is in discussion with the United States for dollar swap line. And in this regard, India has already entered into currency swap agreements with number of countries such as Japan, UAE, SAARC countries, etc. So it is in this regard that this particular topic of currency swap agreements have been explained in this particular article of Focus magazine. So after understanding this news, let us move on to our next news discussion. The next news to be discussed appears on page number 7. It says, Press Trust of India denting India's national interest as per Prasar Bharati. Now this particular news highlights that Prasar Bharati seeks to review its financial relation with the Press Trust of India. And this is because the Press Trust of India had aired an interview of China's ambassador to India, whereby the Chinese ambassador has accused India of crossing LAC. And in this regard, the Prasar Bharati has said that the news coverage by PTI was detrimental to national interest and undermined India's territorial integrity. So in this regard, you need to know about Prasar Bharati and its composition as well as about Press Trust of India, as questions may be framed in your upcoming UPSC prelims examination. Now first of all, with respect to the Press Trust of India, it highlights that PTI is the largest news agency in India and it is a non-profit cooperative among more than 500 Indian newspapers. In this regard, PTI took over the operations of Associated Press of India from Reuters after India's independence in 1947. And as of now, PTI is headquartered in New Delhi, in the national capital. Further, PTI is a non-profit trust and it is run by a board of directors having a chairman. And the chairmanship of PTI rotates at the annual general meeting of the Press Trust of India. Further, the day-to-day administration and management of PTI is headed by the Chief Executive Officer. So overall, with respect to Press Trust of India, you need to know that it's a non-profit trust and it's a cooperative among more than 500 newspapers of India. And its administration and management is carried on by a board of directors chaired by the Chief Executive Officer. Now with respect to Prasar Bharati is the Broadcasting Corporation of India and it is a statutory autonomous body. Now it's a statutory autonomous body because it has been established under the Prasar Bharati Broadcasting Corporation of India Act 1990 and came into existence in November 1997. Further, the Prasar Bharati is the public service broadcaster of the country. Now as per the Prasar Bharati Act, the objectives of this public service broadcasting is achieved through All India Radio as well as Doordarshan. And both these institutions were earlier working as media units under the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting, and from November 1997 they have become constituents of Prasar Bharati as per the Prasar Bharati Broadcasting Corporation of India Act of 1990. Another important point from your prelims perspective is that the motto of All India Radio is Bahujan Hitai, Bahujan Sukhai, whereas the motto of Doordarshan is Satyam Shivam Sundaram, which translates into Truth is the God and God is beautiful. Now, the motto of All India Radio as well as Doordarshan becomes important from your prelims perspective, and questions may be asked in your upcoming prelims examination. Further, with respect to Prasar Bharati Broadcasting Corporation of India Act 1990, the Act provides for establishment of the Broadcasting Corporation for India, which is to be known as Prasar Bharati. So, effectively, Prasar Bharati is the Broadcasting Corporation for India. And the Act also defines its composition, functions, as well as powers of Prasar Bharati. Now, another important aspect is that the Prasar Bharati or the Broadcasting Corporation of India shall be a body corporate having perpetual succession and a common seal with power to acquire, hold, and dispose of both movable and immovable property. Now, important point to be understood here is that Prasar Bharati is a body corporate having perpetual succession, and the general superintendence, direction, and management of Prasar Bharati shall vest in the Prasar Bharati Board, which shall exercise its powers and functions as per the Prasar Bharati Broadcasting Corporation of India Act 1990. So, overall, the point to be understood here is that Prasar Bharati or the Broadcasting Corporation of India is a statutory body and has been provided certain powers and functions under the Prasar Bharati Act of 1990. So, in this particular news, you need to know about Prasar Bharati and the fact that it's a statutory organization, and about Press Trust of India, that it is a non-profit organization. Now, with respect to your prelims examination, this topic of Prasar Bharati and Press Trust of India gets covered under Indian Polity and Governance, and in your mains examination, it gets covered under GS Paper 2, specifically with respect to statutory, regulatory, and various quasi-judicial bodies. So, you must know about Prasar Bharati as well as Press Trust of India. So, after understanding this, let's move on to our next news discussion. The next news to be discussed appears on page number 9. It says South China Sea rights should be rooted in the UN Treaty as per ASEAN, that is Association for Southeast Asian Nation. Now it says that the bloc strengthens assertion vis-a-vis China's claim on the entire South China Sea. Now the members of ASEAN are Brunei, Cambodia, Indonesia, Laos, Malaysia, Myanmar, Philippines, Singapore, Thailand, and Vietnam. Now, as you can see that most of these countries are around the South China Sea, and hence this assertion has come by the chairman of ASEAN in the 36th ASEAN Summit, whereby he has said that disputes around the South China Sea must be solved as per the United Nations Convention on the Law of Seas of 1982. So the chairman of ASEAN has said that any dispute with respect to South China Sea must be solved as per the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, and this United Nations Law on the Sea should be the basis of sovereign rights and maritime entitlements in the South China Sea rather than mere historical claims as put forward by China. So again we see a news with respect to countering the hegemony of China, especially in the South China Sea, by ASEAN. Now in this regard you must know that the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea has created 3 institutions to regulate navigation in international waters. These institutions are: first, the International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea; second, the International Seabed Authority; and third, the Commission on the Limits of the Continental Shelf. So if a question is asked in your prelims examination that under which law these 3 international institutions are established, then the correct answer would be United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. Now, following rule of law as per United Nations Convention of the Law of the Sea has been stressed by chairman of ASEAN at the 36th ASEAN Summit, which took place on 26 June 2020. And the theme of this summit was Cohesive and Responsive ASEAN in 2020. The chairman highlighted that there is a need to enhance ASEAN's unity, cooperation and solidarity, economic integration, as well as ASEAN awareness and identity. And in this regard, the chairman also emphasized the importance of promoting ASEAN proactiveness and capacity in seizing opportunities, as well as addressing the challenges brought about by rapid changes in regional and global landscape. Now here this aspect becomes important for us to understand, whereby the chairman has stressed on addressing the challenges which has been brought about by rapid changes in the regional and global landscape. And this aspect has been highlighted especially with respect to China. Further, in this regard, the chairman asserted that ASEAN reaffirmed its shared commitment to maintain and promote peace, security, and stability in the region. So basically, the chairman is trying to highlight that any conflict in the South China Sea must be solved through the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. It says that ASEAN reaffirmed its shared commitment to maintain and promote peace, security, and stability in the region, as well as to the peaceful resolution of disputes, including full respect for legal and diplomatic process without resorting to the threat or use of force as per the universally recognized principles of international law, including the 1982 United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. So, in the summit, the chairman of ASEAN has stressed that 1982 United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea should be the guiding principles with respect to any maritime disputes surrounding South China Sea, and any prior historical claims should not be a mere criteria. And it is in this regard that ASEAN countries reaffirm the importance of maintaining peace, security, stability, safety, as well as freedom of navigation. Now, as we have already seen, that United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea has created three institutions to regulate international navigation or navigation in international waters, namely the International Tribunal for Law of the Sea, International Seabed Authority, as well as Commission on the Limits of Continental Shelf. Further, it not only highlights about navigation in the territorial waters but also overflight above the South China Sea, and in this regard it recognized the benefits of having South China Sea as a sea of peace, stability and prosperity. So overall, the members of ASEAN see South China Sea as a sea of peace, stability and prosperity, and not as an area of dispute. Further, the chairman asserted that ASEAN underscores the importance of full and effective implementation of 2002 Declaration on the Conduct of Parties in the South China Sea in its entirety. And in this regard, the chairman stressed that ASEAN was encouraged by the progress of the substantive negotiation towards early conclusion of an effective and substantive code of conduct in the South China Sea, which is inconsistent with international law, including the 1982 Convention of United Nations. Now, this code of conduct in the South China Sea has been signed between members of ASEAN as well as between China in the year 2002. So, as it says that the declaration on the conduct of parties in the South China Sea between governments of the member states of ASEAN and the government of People's Republic of China, whereby both the parties, that is ASEAN and China, agreed and reaffirmed their commitment to the purposes and principles of Charter of United Nations, the 1982 UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, the Treaty of Amity and Cooperation in Southeast Asia, the five principles of peaceful coexistence, and other universally recognized principles of international law, which shall serve as the basic norms governing state to state relations. So it is hereby where China had earlier agreed with the members of ASEAN that China will not only follow the principles of UN Charter but will also follow other international treaties, including the 1982 United Nations Convention on the Law of the Seas. Further, in this regard, both China and ASEAN members reaffirmed their respect and commitment to the freedom of navigation in and overflight above the South China Sea, as provided for by the universally recognized principles of international law, including the 1982 UN Convention on Law of the Sea. So it is in this regard that the chairman of ASEAN has underscored the importance of full and effective implementation of the 2002 Declaration on the Conduct of Parties in South China Sea between members of ASEAN as well as China. Further, ASEAN reaffirmed that the 1982 Convention on the Laws of the Sea is the basis to determine maritime entitlements, sovereign rights, jurisdiction, and legitimate interest over maritime zones. And in this regard, ASEAN also stressed the importance of undertaking confidence building measures and preventive measures to enhance trust and confidence among parties, including China. Further, the chairman of ASEAN stressed that 1982 Convention sets out the legal framework within which all activities in the oceans and seas must be carried out. Further, ASEAN also emphasized the importance of non-militarization and self-restraint in the conduct of all activities by claimants and all other states, including those mentioned in the Declaration on the Conduct of Parties in the South China Sea. which could further complicate the situation and escalate tensions in the South China Sea. So overall, ASEAN has asserted that any dispute in the South China Sea should be settled as per the 1982 United Nations Convention on the Law of the Seas, and China should also abide by the 2002 Declaration on the Conduct of Parties in the South China Sea as agreed between China and members of ASEAN. So, from your prelims perspective, this topic gets covered under current events of international importance, and in your mains, it gets covered under GS paper 2, especially with respect to important international institutions, agencies, and forum and their structure and mandate. So, in this regard, you should also know about ASEAN. Now, ASEAN was established on 8th August 1967 in Bangkok by signing of the ASEAN Declaration, which is also referred as the Bangkok Declaration. The founding fathers of ASEAN were Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, Singapore, and Thailand. ASEAN was then joined by Brunei Darussalam, Vietnam, Laos, Myanmar, as well as Cambodia. And today it comprises of 10 member states. And the motto of ASEAN is One Vision, One Identity, and One Community. And the 36th ASEAN Summit was chaired by Vietnam as per the ASEAN Charter. So in this regard, you should know about ASEAN Charter as well as ASEAN Chair. Now with respect to ASEAN Charter, it says that the Charter serves a firm foundation in achieving the ASEAN community by providing legal status and institutional framework for ASEAN. So the Charter provides for two aspects. The first is with respect to providing a legal status, and the second is with respect to providing institutional framework for ASEAN. Further, the Charter also codifies norms, rules, and values which set clear target for ASEAN and presents accountability and compliance. So the legal status as well as institutional framework as provided by ASEAN Charter also ensures accountability as well as compliance by ASEAN members. Further, the ASEAN Charter entered into force on 15 December 2008 in Indonesia in Jakarta. Further, it says that as per the Charter, ASEAN will operate under a new legal framework and will establish a number of new organs to boost its community building process. And in effect, the ASEAN Charter has become a legally binding agreement among the 10 ASEAN member states. Further, the Charter will also be registered with the Secretariat of the United Nations as per Article 102 of the United Nations Charter. Now, first paragraph of the UN Charter says that every treaty and every international agreement entered into by any member of the United Nations after the present Charter comes into force shall as soon as possible be registered with the Secretariat and published by the Secretariat. So it is in this regard the ASEAN Charter is also registered with the Secretariat of United Nations. Further, with respect to ASEAN Chair, it says that according to Article 31 of the ASEAN Charter, the chairmanship of ASEAN shall rotate annually based on the alphabetical order of English names of member states. And accordingly, for the year 2020, the current chair for ASEAN is held by Vietnam. A member state assuming the chairmanship shall chair the ASEAN Summit and related summits, the ASEAN Coordinating Council, the three ASEAN Community Councils, namely Political Security Community Council, ASEAN Economic Community Council, and ASEAN Socio-Cultural Community Council, relevant ASEAN sectoral ministerial bodies, and senior officials, as well as the Committee of Permanent Representatives. So basically, the ASEAN Charter provides a new legal framework for the functioning of ASEAN and ensures accountability and compliance by the ASEAN members. So all these aspects becomes important for you to understand with respect to ASEAN, both from your prelims as well as from your mains perspective. Hence this particular topic becomes important primarily from the perspective of international relations under your prelims as well as mains examination under GS paper 2. With this, let's move on to our next news discussion. Now the next news appears on page number 11. It says black hole merges with unusual compact object. This could be the lightest black hole or the heaviest neutron star. Now this particular news is with respect to an observation of 2019 August. And these observations are of LIGO and Virgo gravitational wave network, which witnessed merger of a black hole with 23 times mass of a sun and another object which was 2.6 times the mass of the sun. Now the curiosity among the scientists was that what was this object which was 2.6 times the mass of the sun, whether it was a neutron star or whether it was a black hole. So scientists believed that either it was the heaviest neutron star that they have encountered or it was the lightest black hole that they would have ever known. So it is in this aspect this particular news appears on page number 11. Now, a similar question was asked by UPSC in the prelims of 2019. The question was, recently scientists observed the merger of giant black holes billions of light years away from the Earth. What is the significance of this observation? Options were A. Higgs boson particles were detected. B. Gravitational waves were detected. C. Possibility of intergalactic space travel through wormhole was confirmed. And D. It enabled the scientists to understand singularity. Now here the correct answer is B. That is, gravitational waves were detected during the merger of giant black holes. So in this regard, let us understand few basic aspects about gravitational waves. It says that what causes gravitational waves. So the most powerful gravitational waves are created when objects move at very high speeds. And some examples of events that could cause gravitational waves are when star explodes asymmetrically, when two big stars orbit each other, and when two black holes orbit each other and merge. So when two black holes orbit each other and merge, then gravitational wave is detected. And this news is with respect to merger of 23 times mass of a sun and a star which is 2.6 times the mass of the sun. Now it is very difficult to capture these gravitational waves taking place billions of light years away. So it says that types of object that create gravitational waves are far away, and sometimes these events only cause small or weak gravitational waves, and the waves are then very weak by the time they reach Earth. So it is very difficult to detect these gravitational waves taking place in the galaxy. So the question is, how do we know about gravitational waves? Through LIGO. Now LIGO stands for Laser Interferometer Gravitational Wave Observatory. It says that in 2015 scientists detected gravitational waves for the very first time, and they used a very sensitive instrument called LIGO. These first gravitational waves happened when two black holes crashed into one another. The collision happened 1.3 billion years ago, but the ripples didn't make it to Earth until 2015. So, how are these gravitational waves detected? So, when a gravitational wave passes by Earth, it squeezes and stretches space, and LIGO can detect this squeezing and stretching of space, as each LIGO observatory has two arms that are more than 4 kilometers long, and a passing gravitational wave causes the length of the arms to slightly change. And these observatory uses lasers, mirrors, extremely sensitive instruments to detect these tiny changes caused due to gravitational waves. So this is how a gravitational wave occurring million and billions of light years away is detected by LIGO. Now generally when massive star dies, they collapse under their own gravity and form black hole. However, when smaller star dies, they collapse to form neutron stars. Now astronomers have always been puzzled between the mass gap of black hole as well as neutron star. Now the heaviest known neutron star is 2.5 times the mass of the sun, or it is also referred as 2.5 solar masses, whereas the lightest black hole is 5 solar masses, or 5 times the mass of the sun. So astronomers as well as scientists always wondered about this mass gap of 2.5 solar masses. So the question before the astronomers was that, does anything lie in between this particular mass gap of 2.5 solar masses? That is between the lightest known black hole and between the heaviest known neutron star. Now the latest detection by LIGO has cleared some air with respect to this mass gap. Now as per a new study of LIGO as well as the Virgo detector in Europe, scientists have announced the discovery of an object which is 2.6 solar masses, and this places the object firmly in the mass gap, that is between black hole as well as neutron star. This particular object was found on 14th August 2019 as it merged with a black hole of 23 solar masses and generated a splash of gravitational waves detected back on Earth by LIGO as well as Virgo. Now scientists believe that this mass gap in fact may not exist at all, but may have been due to limitations in observational capabilities which might become clearer in future observations. Now, as we remember that the first gravitational wave which we observed here back on Earth was in 2015. So the cosmic merger described in the study is an event dubbed GW190814. So please remember this event named GW190814 as a prelims question can be asked on this particular aspect. And this merger resulted in creating a black hole about 25 times the mass of the sun. Further, some of the merged mass was also converted to a blast of energy in the form of gravitational waves, and the newly formed black hole lies about 800 million light years away from Earth. So in this topic, you should know about gravitational waves as well as about mass gap between neutron star and that of a black hole. Now this topic becomes important primarily from the perspective of your prelims examination under general science, as you see that a question has already been asked under this particular topic. With this, let's move on to our next news discussion. Now the next news to be discussed appears on page number 10. It says the Reserve Bank of India extends borrowing time for banks. Now this particular news says that Reserve Bank has decided to extend an enhanced borrowing facility provided to banks to meet liquidity shortages till September 30th. Now this particular news follows from the news which we had covered on 28th March 2020, whereby the Reserve Bank of India took a number of decisions to ease economic transactions in the country because of the COVID-19 situation. On 28th March 2020, we also discussed various measures taken by Reserve Bank of India to enhance liquidity in the economy, including targeted long-term repo operations, that is LTROs, reduction in cash reserve ratio, relaxation in daily maintenance of CRR, and relaxation in borrowing under MSF. So earlier, these relaxations were allowed till 30th of June 2020, and now these relaxations have been extended till the end of September. So in this regard, the Reserve Bank has increased borrowing limit of scheduled banks under MSF, that is marginal standing facility, from 2% to 3% of their net demand and time liabilities till end of September, and RBI has also relaxed the requirements of daily maintaining of cash reserve ratio till the end of September of 2020. So in this regard, let us again revise these important decisions which have been taken by Reserve Bank of India to ease liquidity conditions in the economy. Now with respect to liquidity adjustment facility, that is LAF, let us understand its three aspects, that is marginal standing facility, repo rate as well as reverse repo rate. Now repo basically means repurchase agreement, and it is a short-term borrowing in government securities, and the interest rate charged for such repurchase agreement is referred as repo rate. So the interest rate charged by the Reserve Bank of India to lend money to commercial banks in event of shortfall of funds is referred as repo rate. So under a repo transaction, RBI lends money to commercial banks at certain interest, and commercial banks transfers government securities to the RBI, and the rate of interest charged by RBI is referred as repo rate. Now these government securities which are transferred by commercial banks under repo transaction are not part of SLR. Now this is an important aspect to be noted. Now as per SLR requirement, commercial banks have to maintain a percentage of their net demand and time liabilities in the form of cash, gold and government securities. Now the next aspect to be understood is with respect to marginal standing facility. Now under MSF transaction, the RBI lends money at certain interest rate to commercial banks, and commercial bank pledges government securities to RBI. Now these government securities which are pledged to RBI under marginal standing facility transaction are part of statutory liquidity ratio. And because of this, the rate of interest under MSF is slightly higher or more than the repo rate transaction. Whereas under reverse repo transaction, the RBI borrows money from commercial bank, or we can say that commercial banks park their funds with RBI because RBI offers them a good rate of interest. Now generally, reverse repo rate is a mechanism to absorb liquidity from the market. So when RBI increases reverse repo rate, then commercial bank transfer their surplus funds to RBI, and this reduces liquidity from the economy. And reversely, RBI reduces the reverse repo rate when economy needs to be liquidated. That is when more money is need to be injected in the economy. Now the RBI has adopted a multi-pronged approach to ensure that COVID-19 virus and its impact does not lead to shortage of liquidity in the market. So RBI has come up with number of measures such as targeted long-term repo operations, reduction in cash reserve ratio, relaxation in daily maintenance of cash reserve ratio, and relaxation in borrowings under marginal standing facility. Now, with respect to LTRO or targeted long term repo operations, you need to understand that earlier RBI allowed for term repos, that is, a loan which had a period of either 7 days, 14 days, 26 days, or 56 days. Further, the RBI came up with another variant of this term repo, namely the long term repo operations. And this long term repo operation had a higher maturity period of 1 year and 3 years. And through this, RBI planned to inject rupees 1 lakh crores in the Indian economy. So, as per the targeted long term repo operations, whatever amount is raised by the commercial bank, such amounts have to be invested in corporate bonds, commercial paper, and other financial instruments as suggested by the Reserve Bank of India. Hence, it is referred as targeted long term repo operations. Further, the interest rate under targeted long term repo operations would be floating interest rate, and this would be linked to the policy of repo rate. Next, the RBI has allowed reduction in cash reserve ratio. Now, cash reserve ratio or CRR refers to a percentage of cash which is to be kept as reserve, and it has to be a part of bank's total deposit. So, in order to improve the liquidity situation in the market, the Reserve Bank has decided to reduce the CRR from existing 4% to 3%. Hence, it means that the banks have to maintain less cash as a part of reserve, and more cash is now available to inject into the economy. Now, another step taken by RBI is with respect to relaxation in daily maintenance of CRR. It says that all commercial banks are required to maintain 100% of cash reserve ratio requirement on an average basis during the fortnight. So, suppose a bank is supposed to maintain rupees 100 as part of CRR requirement, and after every 14 days it is supposed to maintain rupees 1400. Now the RBI stipulation says that even for every day, that is each single day, the bank has to maintain at least 90% of the minimum amount required to be reserved as a part of CRR. So suppose if on one day a bank is able to maintain rupees 90, then such balance shall be offset by maintaining a higher balance on the second day. But now this limitation of maintaining 90% of every day as a part of CRR requirement has been reduced to 80%. So now only rupees 80 has to be maintained on a everyday basis with respect to maintaining a part of CRR by the bank. So it highlights that the RBI has now decided to reduce the requirement of minimum daily CRR balance maintenance from 90% to 80%. And this is a one-time dispensation available up to June 26, 2020. RBI has also provided for relaxation in borrowings under the marginal standing facility. Now, we have already discussed that under the marginal standing facility, the rate of interest is higher as compared to the repo rate. And this is because of use of government securities which are part of statutory liquidity ratio. So it says that since the banks uses government securities which are part of SLR, the RBI imposes limits on banks' borrowings under marginal standing facility. And as of now, the banks can borrow only up to 2% of their net demand and time liability. And accordingly, the RBI has decided to increase this borrowing limit to 3% of net demand and time liability. And this will be applicable up to 30 June 2020. So it is in this regard the Reserve Bank had decided to extend the enhanced borrowing facility provided to banks to meet their liquidity shortages till the end of September 2020. So with this, let's move on to our next news discussion. The next news to be discussed appears on page number 12. It says 1921 and the Malabar Rebellion. Why is there a controversy in Kerala over a new film project on the protagonist of an uprising against the British? Now in this news, let us understand about the Malabar Rebellion. It says that it broke out in the southern taluks of Malabar in August 1921, and the rebellion took the shape of a guerrilla type attack on Janmis, police, and the troops. Now, the Janmis were feudal lords who were mostly upper caste Hindus. Further, it says that the movement took a violent turn and the cause of controversy as highlighted. Now, Mapilas had been among the victims of oppressive agrarian relations protected by the British. Further, there were also various rebellious outbreaks in the region during 19th and earlier 20th centuries. Now, the sentiments of this rebellion was also strengthened by the Khilafat movement launched by Mahatma Gandhi along with the non-cooperation struggle. So, the Khilafat movement provided a fresh stimulus to the grievances of the Mappilas. And the Mappilas also linked their social injustice along with the pan-Islamic sentiments created after the collapse of Ottoman Empire. So the Mappila rebellion was inspired by religious ideology and a conception of an alternative system of administration, mainly by a Khilafat government. Now, during the rebellion, many attacks were done on individuals, including Muslims who were loyal to the British. Now, even the moderate Khilafat leaders lamented the rebellion as it had alienated the Hindu sympathy. So, in this regard, you should know certain basic facts about the Malabar rebellion as it forms part of your history and culture. Now, after our discussion, this forms your practice question for the day. The question is, which of the following countries are not members of ASEAN? Options are 1. Brunei, 2. Cambodia, 3. Indonesia, 4. China, and 5. Pakistan. So the question is, select the correct answer using the code given below. Options are A. 2 and 4 only, B. 2 and 5 only, C. 4 and 5 only, and D. 1 and 2 only. Now, coming to the answer of yesterday, the question was, with reference to printing of currency notes in India, consider the following statements. First, the RBI has the authority to print all the currency notes, including currency notes of rupee 1 denomination. No, this statement is incorrect, as currency note of rupee 1 is printed by the Finance Ministry. Second, there is no requirement for the RBI to maintain any assets for printing the currency notes. No, this statement is incorrect, as RBI is supposed to maintain an asset of rupees 200 crores. So the question was, which of the statements given above are correct? So the correct answer is D, that is neither one nor two. So with this, we come to an end to our discussion of today's analysis. Thank you.